So hi guys, this is issue 4 of the Warhammer Stormbringer, and if I could do a subtitle, this would be and now for something completely different. Wonderful. So, this is issue 4. Now we're going to be doing something completely different. I'm going to be showing you some bits of equipment that you wouldn't have seen on this channel. And we're going to be doing some bits and bobs. So this is issue 4 and it's titled Your First Paints, and you're going to get 4 paints and a brush. So normal inside cover. So we've got a little bit about order. We've got a section on how to paint. I'll come back to that. More on how to paint, paint area essentials, how to paint, 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 how to paint. Now obviously we've been collecting models, so you know there's going to be a lot to do. So now we've brought some more rules in. This is rend and damage. This is like the armor saves, where if someone actually... First of all, you're rolling to see if you hit, then you're rolling to see if you've done damage, and then the person you've just hit now gets the opportunity to do a rend. Oh, sorry, rend is an adjustment. So let's say, for example, you hit somebody and you wound them, and they need a 5 to save that shot. If you've got a rend of -1, that now changes to a 6. It's an adjustment. And then obviously you've got damage, and then more. I don't go into the rules because I'm not interested. I don't have the time to play it, but I just like painting them. But more rules, more rules, more rules. Subscription offer. Next week's issue, issue 5, Praetor Prime. That's a Stormcast model. And then issue 6, Hobgrot Splitters. So it looks like we are generally going, odd numbers are going to be Stormcast and even numbers are going to be Orcs. So let's first of all see what we've got. We have got 4 paints and a brush. Now this is, for the purposes of this discussion, this is like when you buy a starter set with Airfix, you get a size 2 brush. It's a brush that can be used for everything. It's not the best brush for all jobs, but this is the starter brush, and as you can see, it's not a really thin brush, but it's not a fat brush. So when you're doing larger areas, this is going to be quite tiresome, but it will do the large areas. It's a very good all-round brush. And I don't know if you looked at those bristles. I did say in an earlier episode, I don't think these are the best brushes on the market, but they are very good brushes. They're certainly not the worst. They're not the sort of ones you'll get from Poundland. We also get 4 paints, and in no particular order. We get base, Auric Flesh, if that's ever going to focus. Come on. Can we have a focus, please? Right, Auric Flesh. And this one is a Cantor Blue. This one is a lead belcher. Now this is a metallic colour, this is silver. And this one is a Retributor Armour. This is basically a deep gold. Now you'll notice one thing in common with all of these, which is they have the word base on them. Essentially, at a basic level, Citadel do 3 kinds of paints. You have a base paint. The base paint goes on first. It's very heavily pigmented. Again, bringing this down to a basic level, paint consists of, there are other chemicals in there, but essentially you have 2 ingredients. You have the paint, the colour, and you have the carrier. So for example, if you went to the shops and you bought some powder paint, which you mix with water. You have the paint, which is the powder, and then you have the carrier, which is water. Now, there's a little bit more science than to say this is paint, powdered paint and water, but let's go with that. Now, base paints have far too much, sorry, not far too much, but they have much more paint in them, so it's much thicker. It's not thicker, but the color is stronger. So if, say, you got your powdered paints and your water, and they said put 1 teaspoon of paint into 100 ml of water, that's how you make the paint. Now, the base is like putting perhaps 2 spoonfuls of paint into 100 ml, so it's a lot stronger. You paint that on, you can't see through it so much. You then have a layer. A layer paint is much thinner, so you can just very slightly see through it. So if you painted a layer blue on top of a black, it would look different from if you painted a layer blue on top of a white. That white and black would come through a little bit better. So base colours are the first ones, then you've got layers, and then you've got edge paints, which are really designed just for picking up the edges. So if you were painting this sprue, you would first of all paint all of it with a base, then you'd pick up the main bit with a layer, and then the edge you would just paint. See that corner there? You would just be painting that edge, and the paint is designed to help you paint the edges. There are other paints, and the way that I've described that is very, very basic. There's a lot more science than that, but essentially that's it. So as you can see from this magazine, you need paints, you need paper towels, which I tend to use kitchen roll, and then you need your brush. Now, where we go from there is slightly different. You need a water pot. Now, Citadel do dedicated water pots. Most people just use a mug. I actually used this. I will show you this later on. This came from Temu. Oh, sorry, cat on my lap. So what this is, if you use a mug, I know this has got coffee in, and this is one of the problems with using a mug and for paint water. You could have your paint water every time, you take paint out, and then you wash your brush in it, and then you have your cup of coffee next to it, and you're painting away, and you think, I need a cup of coffee. You have a mouthful, and then, oh no, I've just accidentally drunk paint water, and it tastes absolutely awful. So I think it's a good idea to separate. You can use a water pot, and you can get these fancy water pots that have paint holders. I actually discovered this on Temu. It was about £5. Prices change on a regular basis, and you have a pot of water, and you pop that into there, which that now isn't going, and I've just made a big mess everywhere. And why is that not working? Right, it's because I got it in the wrong way. Right, so what you do with this, let me just get my toilet paper and just clean I always make a mess. So what you do is you have this pot of water. It's a little bit like your office water container, and what it does, it uses gravity and it sends a little channel of water, and you've got a pool of water there, so you can dip your brush in there, you can rinse your brush, whatever, and then when you think that water is a bit dirty, or perhaps you want to change colour, what you do is you press the button and it just ejects it, and then it fills it up again. And that's why I like it. It does work quite well. So that's what I use as a water pot. And then the next thing they recommend is a palette pad. Now the palette pads, you can have a piece of plastic, some kind of palette. You're going to be thinning your paints, you're going to be mixing colours, and basically it's a palette. Now what I actually use is a tile. It cleans easily. And when I moved into this house, the landlord had left about 10 tiles in the cupboard, and I just thought it's really rude not to use it. So that's what I use. Pallet and water bottle, it's up to you what you use. So there you go, it goes like water pot, and it's got a mug there. Paint pallets, like you see, you can use a paint, you can use a plate, anything you want. Right, so then it goes through the different paint brushes. We've got a starter brush there, we've got a base brush. Base brushes are very good for putting lots of, you know, slapping the base paint on. Then you've got a dry brush. We'll go into dry brushing at a later stage. Layer brush is a little bit closer to your starter brush, and then texture spreader, which we'll go into another one. And then you've got your paints. Now, shaking and opening your pots. Give your paints a thorough shake before you open them. When you open the pot, lock the lid in place with a plastic tab on the back of the pot. What they haven't mentioned is, let's go with the blue one. When you first get your paint, you don't know how long it's been since that was manufactured. Over time, the paint and the carrier separates. So ideally, you want to mix that for a good 30 seconds. I'll turn it upside down, and if you don't, you'll get all the thick paint at the bottom, and it'll be thin and runny at the top, and you just won't get the good coverage. And just shake, 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 shake. So when you open it, now this is obviously, I'm dealing with a Citadel colour here. Different paint pots are different. These are quite good because you have this little bit there, you can get the paint from there, but you see you've got a little tab there, and what you can do, you can push that tab in and it will stop that from closing. The only problem is sometimes it opens up too far, so I've got a little kitten in the way, and then when you close it you can just pull that tab out. But I'm going to show you a way that not everybody seems to know about, because this is the problem, is getting that tab back out. So right, sorry, kitten down. Right, so when you get your brushes, you get this little brush protector. Use that, open your pot, pop that into there like that, and now that won't close. And then when you've finished, take it out, close the lid, pop that back. If you keep care of your pots, you won't get much paint on there, and if you do get paint on there, it really doesn't matter. So that's it. So the next step is, it tells you about holding your brush. Now, we don't need to go too much detail. How you hold your brush is up to you, but essentially you're holding it like a pencil. I like to hold it round about this bevel. There are three areas, it's technical names. I want to keep this quite basic. I think I've got another video somewhere that goes on about the different sections. But basically I like to hold the brush round about there, and that gives me a lot more control. If you are painting a big large area with a big paintbrush, I might hold it at the end and I can just slap, slap, slap. But for general painting, I'm going to hold round about that area, and that gives me good control overall. So I've got a kitten, yep. Right, so these particular pots, you can take the paint from this piece there. So you're going to pick your paint. Now notice what I've done there is I've not put paint all the way up the bristles. Do not go all the way up to the top, and that makes sure that you've got, you know, if you get paint right up the bristles, it's going to dry and it's going to ruin your brush. Generally speaking, these paints need to be thinned, so you're going to transfer your paint onto your palette. What I generally do is I use the front third for picking the paint up, and then I'll mix it, and then when I'm actually painting, I'll load up no more than 2/3. Once I've loaded the brush, I can clean my brush. You can't see that, but so you can see there that all the blue has come out of there. And I've just cleaned the brush, and then I'll eject that because that's quite bluey. And then what I'll do is I will use the water in my brush, and I can just thin the paint to the consistency that I want. And I will probably have to explain that again because it's going to feature in the magazine later. Right, so excuse my use of toilet paper. I just want to clean the palette off so that we do start with a clean palette. Shouldn't use toilet paper on your brushes because it does get lid in it. But, right, so that's your paint. You know, it doesn't keep that clean, does it? But it's better. Right, so next step, you need to pull. Right, so this is going to be the next section. So I'm a little bit disappointed because it's not explained about thinning the paints. So I will go through thinning the paints. Pull the brush down. Do not need to undercoat. Right, so that's something else. Now, traditional painting, you have a primer and you have a paint. The primer sticks to the bare plastic or metal or whatever you're painting. The paint sticks to the primer. These are very, very good. You do not need a primer. You can paint them straight on. Right, so make sure your paint pots are closed after you use them. So, yeah, that's basically it. So, I'm going to take a very quick break, which will be about half a second for you. And then we'll get on with a little bit of painting. Okay, so apologise about that short break. Right, so when I paint, I have 3 pieces of kitchen roll. I have a piece here which I've got next to my palette. Let me move that across. And then I have 2 pieces on standby. This then is good for if I have an accident, I need to wipe something up quickly, or whatever. Right, so let's crack on. I'm going to explain some things that aren't in the magazine, which I'm a bit disappointed with. I have shaken this pot. This is Retributor Armour. We're going to start with the Stormcast Eternals. So we're going to paint a total of 6 of them. I'm only going to paint 1 in full, and then I'll paint the others speeded up. So as I've explained earlier on, I'm going to just pop the little tab in the back there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take some paint, pop it onto our palette. I'm going to pop as much as we need, and if we run out we can just pop some more on. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the consistency of that, and then we're just going to thin it down a bit with some water. Now we're going to be doing base painting. In the magazine it says to apply 3 coats. Ignore that. This is, if you thin this too much, you're going to get what's called breaking. Right, that's thin. Now, what you're aiming for, you don't want to put one big thick coat on. What you want to do is you want to aim for a minimum of 2 coats to give you a solid coat. So let me start with this bit because you can see that better. So you're going to paint it on, make sure you're getting all of the detail, and what you're going to notice is the coverage isn't fantastic. I might actually have overthinned. I have a habit of thinning my paints too much. Right, I'm going to paint quite a big bit of this. Right, so yeah, I do tend to overthin. I aim for 2 thin coats. You'll hear that said a lot in the model Warhammer community, but I tend to need 3 coats. Right, so you can see that that's quite a, if I can get a focus, come on. Right, so that's quite a scruffy layer. It's not really that perfect. That's okay, we're just getting some coverage. Now, that doesn't take long to dry. 5-10 minutes perhaps. What you'll find is if you're doing batch painting, you'll paint 5 or 6 models. By the time you finish the last one, sorry, another rule, if you stop for any length of time, just clean your brush out. This is another reason why I have this kitchen roll, by the way, and I forgot to tell you another little trick. When you first paint, just touch the end. I'm going to show you. When you take paint off the palette, you're going to have a little blob on the end, and that can just go a little bit. I don't know if you can see that. You can't because of the focus, but there's a bit of a thick blob. It doesn't really matter so much with base paints because you're going to be spreading it all around anyway. This brush is far too small for this job, but you can do it. So if you put some paint on your brush, just touch the very tip, and now you'll see the paint is a bit more consistent. So it hasn't started with a big blob. Again, you will still spread that around like so. So that's a first coat on. I think that's almost ready. So when you come to do the second coat, what you're now doing is you're building that first coat up. I think I've got a little touch of something in my brush there. And then what you'll notice, I'm only doing this down the middle because then you can see either side. And you're keeping the paint thin so that you don't lose any detail on the model. So if anything, this paint will thicken as you paint because the water's evaporating. Right, so there we go. So can you see that coverage is much better? If you look at the little lightning strike, if you look on the left and look on the right, the coverage is much better. I'm going to thin that a little bit more. Maybe some of the water missed. Now it's better to over thin than it is to under thin. If you under thin, it just means, let's get a little bit of paint there and then we'll thin that down a bit more to show you what over thinning looks like. So there we have really thin paint, and can you see there the coverage is quite terrible. I've got paint on it, it's absolutely fine, but the coverage isn't great. Now in that case I would expect, it's not quite dry, I would expect to have to do 3 coats on that. What I might also consider doing is when I've finished that second coat, I might just thin the paint down a bit more, and then I will give it a 3rd coat, just to make sure it's got a good, but what you're looking for is a nice even coverage, and it's just as simple as that. What I'll also perhaps do sometimes is I'll have a little splodge of what I think is nicely thin paints, then I'll have one that's a little bit over thinned, and then if I think that's a little bit thick, I can just bring that in, and you're just using the palette however you want and just applying the paint. Now if you had a big base brush, which I think we're getting with the premium pack or the subscription pack, that will come in a later issue, that will be a lot easier. The base brush is a little bit thicker, and obviously you can get these painted a little bit quicker. Now I say painting them a little bit quicker, this isn't a race. Now obviously if you're buying these from the newsagents, you're getting 1 issue a week. Why not spend a little bit of time every day and make them last a week? So second coat going on there, and you can see there the coverage is a lot better. almost actually looking like gold. So obviously I wouldn't do one coat hair and one coat a bit there and a bit hair. I would do the whole model, but it just goes to show you how it's done. So let's get, I'm going to need far more paint than that, so I'm going to really load my palette up. And remember not to put all of the bristles into the pot. I think I have done there. So very quickly clean the brush out before it dries. Yeah, I've got a few little. And then, now normally we don't recommend thinning metallic paints with water. Some paints are designed to be thinned with water, and this is one. Citadel paints generally are designed to be thinned with water. Some paints are horrible if you thin with water. Most might need, say, an alcohol based thinners, but these are actually designed, this is Citadel aim their hobby at the younger market, getting them in young. And you know, it's not saying you have to be young to play Warhammer, but you know, get them in young, and people stay with a hobby for a long time. You get some old guys playing, and you get some absolute geeks, and then you get people from all walks of life. I know of one very good YouTuber called the Miniatures Paintbrush. He's a school teacher, and apparently he got started just by seeing these models in the window of a Games Workshop store, and he went in and said, I want to buy them, and they wouldn't sell them. So the only way he was going to get nice models was to paint them, and he's become very, very good. Very good. I have a few favourite painters. Although in all fairness, now look, what I'm doing is I'm actually fairly swamping this, because the paint is thin. You can swamp it a little bit and it will just go into the recess, and when it dries it just kind of fills the recess, and it's all about keeping the detail. Now I'm not concerning myself with whether it should be gold or another colour. I'm just base painting the whole lot. When it comes to, like, if I get a bit up there, perhaps that should be red, I'll just pop a little red base paint over the top of it. But for now I just want to get the whole model covered. Some of the areas are quite tricky to reach, and things like chainmail is difficult because it's quite well detailed. See if I got some chainmail there. Oops, sorry, I just caught that with my glasses. So there we go. So there's the chainmail. Now if you brush in one way, you're not going to get underneath, so you need to make sure you get in there. But generally painting in one direction, I generally paint from top to bottom, which I haven't done in this case. And I'll be honest with you, you will get paint all over your fingers. And just get as much of the model as you can. Now you will invariably come, well, you'll think you've painted every bit of this model, you'll come back to it to do a second coat, and then you'll realise you've missed something, and that always happens. And the way I deal with that is I paint the first coat on the bit that I've missed, carry on, give it the second coat for the rest of the model, and then the whole thing will probably get a third coat. Sometimes on my third or fourth or fifth coat I might just be selective. I'll just paint those areas that I just think needs a little bit of help. Perhaps one area my brush was a little bit wetter, so I did miss some of the model, so the coverage isn't so good, and then You know, if it's got really good coverage, do you really need to give it an extra coat? I don't think so. So, but there is a big, I keep telling you golden rules. It's a little bit like NCIS where Gibbs rules and he has like rule number 1, rule number 1, whatever. So the golden rule is, it's your model. You paint it. If you're happy, I've had people come up to me and go, what do you think? And I've said to them, are you happy? And they said yes. And I'm like, well, I like it then. Because what I say, when I'm looking at your model, what I think is actually irrelevant. If I'm happy with it, you know, if you paint your models, you're really happy with it, and then you see someone else's and you think there's a better, well, what you should be doing is becoming social, have a little discussion with them and say, how did you do that? But if your model is the best of your ability, then you should be happy. My personal mantra is that if my next model is better than this one, then I'm happy. Right, that's almost got the first coat on, but I'm running out of paint. So I'm going to just close the lid, give that a bit of a shake, and that's going to load that tip up again. And I can pop more paint on. And when I do the speeded up version of this, because I'm painting 5 models, you're going to see me do this an awful lot of times. In fact, let's just close it up. So clean my brush and then use that water. We're going to thin that down. Generally you're looking at maybe 1 part paint, 1 part water. I tend to go, as an average, probably 1 part paint, 1 part water, plus a couple more brushfuls. And then it just, this is very difficult to explain, but this just feels right as you paint. And then don't go straight from that, mixing it. Clean your brush, give it a good clean. You see that I'm using this as a bit of a scruffy part. Right, so get a not so good bit, have a look at your coverage. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. When you're starting out, guys, you will have areas that are too thick. If it does go on too thick, get some, dip your brush in the water and just move it around, get that thinned so before it dries, otherwise you're going to obscure all the details. If you get it too thin, you're just going to have to do another coat. And it's just all about experience. I've been doing this a while, so I've kind of developed the ability to just know how the paint drags. So unfortunately I can't show you that. It's just get a model or have a feel how it drags, get a model and then just pop it on and see if it's okay. And then maybe get an old something scruffy that you don't want anymore. Maybe just pop some paint on the palette, don't thin it, see how it drags and then see how it applies, and then you'll see the difference. And then another time maybe over thin your paint and then see how it drags on the palette and then paint it onto the model. So after a while you will start to learn how it feels on the brush. And then there's a lot of this I'm going to miss. This is one of the benefits of, so when I mentioned in an earlier magazine about sub-assemblies, can you see why we do sub-assemblies? It means that I can paint this model and then put it together. You don't, you know, you put some of it together and then you just keep some of it apart so that you can paint it. And then once it's painted, but you have to be careful in what you paint and what you leave, because the glues that we use, I mean these are push fits, but the glues that we use don't like paint. So if you paint over a glue point, the model's not going to stick together too well. So you can see from the base I'm not being neat and tidy. I really don't need to. We'll do our tidying up later on. I'm really enjoying myself now. I have not done figure painting for ages. So just getting that paint on, really not being neat and tidy, as you can see from the state of the base. And as I say, the main thing really is just enjoy the hobby. As I'm painting this, I have about half an hour before I need to get up before I need to go to bed to go to work in the morning. There's no way I'm going to finish painting 5 models, 3 coats in an hour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint what I can. I'm not going to paint the rock because I know that's going to be another colour, so I can't see the point. Right, so that is my first layer, guys. So clean your brush first. So if I'm not changing colour, but if I was changing colour, I usually give it about 3 rubs. Then I'll get rid of that water and then I can use the clean water. And then you might want to just run that under the tap and give it a really good clean. Definitely clean your brushes at the end of your session. And when you've finished, pop the cap back on. That will just help protect it. So this is my model after 1 coat. Okay, so you see that it's quite patchy. Some patches are quite good. There might even be there's a little bits up there that I've missed, that down there, right at the bottom of the staff. So as you are painting, you'll see bits that you've missed. I've missed right up there, but that's okay. It's just giving me a bit of a pointer. Now I think you will agree I've done 1 base coat and already it just looks a little bit better. These are going to get painted in green, so immediately after 1 base coat you now have it's like when you're playing a game and you have red pieces, blue pieces, green pieces. Straight away now you know which side belongs to which. Obviously the only way you can tell which are which side is by looking at the actual models, and if you didn't know any of these races, would you be able to tell which ones are which? I'm not sure. I could, because I know what an orc is and I know what a Stormcast Eternal is, but that compared to a model that's green, it now sticks out like a sore thumb. So that is actually probably ready for another coat, but that's not going to get another coat today because I need to make an edit. So what I'm going to do is next time, I've used all of that water already. Can you believe that? Full pot of water. So next time in a minute you will see me do this. I'll put a 2nd coat on and I'll put a 3rd coat on, and then you'll see the model, and then we'll have a little chat about it. We'll look at the quality of it, and then what I'll do is I will do these 5 models, 1st coat, 2nd coat, 3rd coat if it needs it, all speeded up to some nice music. Then we'll have a look at them all and then we'll start on the next stage. I'll see you in a second, guys. Okay, so what I've done off camera, I've done the other 5 Stormcast. As you can see, the coats aren't amazing, and in fact actually I've missed bits. That's absolutely fine. It's only a 1st coat. So what we won't need to do now is apply a 2nd coat. You see that you've got little bits that we've missed, and all we're going to do is just going to go over it and just make that coat a little bit more solid. I am going to speed this up because time's getting on, and obviously watching me painting for ages and ages is going to be quite boring. But yeah, let's crack on with it. Okay, so that's that one second coated. As you can see, the coverage is not focusing. There we go. It's a lot more solid. It's much neater. I've focused on the areas that were a little bit patchy the first time. I've also focused on any areas that I may have missed. So I've been a little bit more careful, and I'm quite happy with that result. You may not get perfect on the second coat. The magazine does actually say aim to do it in 3 coats. Obviously, as you become more experienced, you can do it in 2 coats. I've just found a little bit there that I've missed. So what I might do is go over that in a 3rd coat. But if I do a 3rd coat, what I tend to do is make the 3rd coat slightly thinner, and it just picks up that, you don't want to lose too much detail. I have missed a little bit in the shield detail. This is one of the problems with using a brush that's actually too thin. This is only a starter brush. As we build the collection up, they will be giving us new brushes, so we can actually use a more efficient brush. Also, we're building the model, then painting it, which makes it quite tricky. What we would do once we're more experienced is we would look at doing sub-assembly. So I might split this model in 3, so I'll take his arm off and mount that differently so I can get to the back of the shield, and I might take his other arm off as well, and then I can deal with the body in one go, the left arm in one go, and the right arm in one go. However, it's looking okay. Remember, this is only the beginning. Now what my personal aim is obviously I'm starting with these models. There will be a big collection. I would like to ideally see my last models looking better than my first models. So I'm going to do the next lot off camera, and then we'll progress on with the magazine. Just one very quick thing I forgot to add. Earlier on in the magazine we said these were brand new paints and we need to really shake them up. Now what I have a habit of doing is, obviously this has been well shaken, but obviously when we finished using it, we leave it to sit. It will start to settle. So just every time, get into the habit, every time you pick up a pot of paint to use, give it 5 or 10 seconds shake, and then you'll see there, you'll load that bit up again, ready to do your next bit, and then close it, do a bit of painting. If you run out of paint and you want to top your palette up again, give it another little shake. It's a really good habit to do. Okay, so all my other models have now been coated in 2 coats of Retributor armor, and that is the end of that step. So what it's going to tell us to do now is move on to the other models. Now this has taken a little bit longer than I thought it would, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do very similar to what I did before. I'm going to be painting this one on camera because it's smaller, so I might get it done a bit quicker, and I'll paint the others off camera. So it's all the same. It doesn't matter whether you do whatever, the painting style is all the same. So exactly the same as the Retributor armor. We're going to give this a good shake because we've never used it before. We're going to pop some paint. Let's give that a bit more. The only trouble with these is you can't tell if they are mixed. Sometimes you can look at the bottom and if there's anything in there. So we're going to get, I'm going to get maybe 3 big blobs of paint, and I've put my brush in there way too much. It's not a problem. We'll give that a good clean now before we thin it. We're going to need to get as much of that paint out of the end as we can, and I'm going to give that maybe a ratio of two brushfuls of water for every brushful of paint. That's only a rough guide. As you become more experienced, you'll just drag that a little bit and you'll see what the coverage is like. and I think that's maybe about right. It's very, very hard to explain. It's one of those things you have to do. But you get a little bit of paint on your palette, and can you see there? That's quite nice. So what we're going to do is we'll just apply the paint, and I've only done half of his head, and already he's looking great, because now we've got the contrast between, you know, if you're actually playing this game, guys, up until now, oops, do you know what, I put a bit too much water in there and that's split. That's not a problem. What we'll do is we'll get some more paint, and we'll just perhaps bring about half of that paint in. We'll mix it until we're happy. This is the thing, if you put too much water in the paint, it will split. What I mean by splitting is, let me show you here. Let's get some paint that's really, really thin. So I need a smooth bit. So as you paint, can you see the paint really doesn't want to stick? I'll try and show you that again. So paint, can you see the paint is trying to pull back? You don't want it to do that, so it's a little bit too thin in that case. So that's not a problem. We'll add some more paint. It's all to do with the paint to water ratio, so that's much better. So as you paint, the paint does stick to the model. It won't be perfect because you're painting paint onto plastic. It's not a natural thing to try and mix. Once you've got a little bit of paint on there, when you do the second coat, you're effectively painting paint onto paint, and obviously paint wants to stick to paint. So there we go. So we'll carry on doing that. This is a really, really scruffy layer, but it's fine. Now, it hasn't explained this in the magazine, and I'm going to assume that some of you are absolute beginners. What we're effectively doing, this isn't the final finish. We are going to be applying paints on top of this. We're going to be applying different colours. For example, the Stormcasts, the next step is going to be adding some blue. Now the blue is going to be a lot easier to do because A, there's less of it, and B, it's already got that solid gold, so we have a nice solid coat to start with, and with the blue being a base coat, the gold won't show through, so it's like we've primed it. Right, this is almost finished, and there we have one very, very scruffy, extremely scruffy. That's absolutely fine. So I'll just do the others off camera. That'll give that time to dry, and then we'll get on with the second coat. Okay, so I have everything base coated, just the one coat. Again, terrible coverage, but it's fine. It's just been slapped on, but doing batches like this, it's given this one time to dry. So what we'll do is we'll get on with the second coat. So again, I'm shaking my pot just a little bit, pop some paint onto there, and then hopefully we'll have really good coverage on the second coat. If we don't have it on the second coat, not a problem, we'll just do a third coat, but we're aiming for about 2 or 3 coats for good coverage. And it looks like this might get done in 2. So don't deliberately aim for 2 coats, just aim for nice coverage, and if you don't get it on a second coat, well, you'll just have to do a third coat. So this is quite a time consuming hobby. It's not like my other part works where some issues I just pop in a couple of screws and it's done, and my part works, they all average, I would say my part works average about half an hour an issue. This is going to be a lot longer, and you're probably going to have to do it over multiple sessions. Because I work for a living, I've had to, I think I'm on about the 3rd day of filming, with each stage taken roughly an hour. So I think we're looking at about 6 or 7 hours for this issue, which then actually makes it good value. A lot of people are starting to say part works are not great value anymore, or not as great value. This one actually is. First of all, when you compare the cost of these models versus buying them in the shops, you get a lot of model for your money. A lot of the Warhammer collectors are buying these magazines not because they want the magazine, but because the models are cheap. And secondly, if you put a time value on the part works, now like I say, most of my part works are taken roughly half an hour per issue. At say £10 or £11 an issue, that means it's 20 to £22 per issue. You know, 20 to £22 per hour of hobby time it's costing me. This is 10 quid, was it? £10 I think this each issue costs. £8.99, let's call it a tenner. And if it's taken me £6 hours to do each issue, that's just over a couple of pounds, just over £1 an issue. Right guys, so there is my second model base coated, and I'll do a comparison between coat 1 and coat 2. This was a really hard one to do, it's so detailed. You can see the coverage is much better. So what I'm going to do is I'll do these big boys off camera as I did before, and then we'll move on to the next stage. Like I say, don't worry if you need a 3rd coat, it's absolutely fine. The magazine is saying to do it over 3 coats, just bear with me a sec, my mouth is very dry. Sorry. And also, one thing to know is, I've missed a big bit there, I don't know if you can see the grey in there. The base I've left because I'm going to contradict myself here. It's very obviously not going to be green, so we'll worry about that later. This particular base is going to get painted because you see there's a dead Stormcast there, so he needs to be painted with the golds. But I painted all of the body, A for speed, B to get a good coverage, and also say once I'm sorry, that's bugging me now. I know I'm going to go over with a 2nd coat, but I just want to catch those bits I missed because they are annoying me. So when it comes to doing, that one is a very thick coverage. So when it comes to doing the correct colour, so say for example there's a strap there, so we may do that in a leather colour. Well, because we've already got the base green down, it means it's going to be a lot easier to paint the leather strap, simply because paint goes on to paint better than paint goes on to plastic. But even just for the time bit element, you know, slap the paint on or the whole lot. Now something else I want to quickly mention before I crack on with that and before I forget, the next stage we're going to be doing the blue, but that's, you know, so I have managed to acquire a spare magazine. I was in the newsagents the other day and I was talking to the guy who runs the shop, and he had a customer who asked to put these aside for him every week, and they were paid for. The guy paid in advance for quite a few issues, and then the guy just disappeared. And he said, you know, I've got these magazines, but I'm going to get rid of them. So I said, well, I'll take one off your hands. How much do you want for it? And he says, no, you can have it. And it's quite handy because I did actually say in another issue I'd lost one of these bases, so I've got a spare base, but now I've got some spare models. So Tell me what you think, guys. This is the idea that I've got. Once this in a couple of videos time, I'm going to paint 4 models. One is going to be paints thinned properly, like I'm doing here, right? And I'm going to paint carefully with the base coat. The next one, I'm going to use the same thinned paint, and I'm just going to slap it all on. I like, see there, that's quite heavily slapped on. That's a little bit too much actually. And then the third one is going to be painting straight from the pot, no thinning, just straight from the pot. And then the fourth one is going to be straight from the pot, but it's going to be slapped on. And what I hope that will show you is the difference between painting nicely like that. If you thin your paints, you keep the detail. That one looks like I've lost all the detail in the face, but there is no detail in the face. He's got like a plate over his face. So what should happen is the final one should have no detail because the paint's been applied thickly, and the first one has been applied thin to keep the detail. So I just want to get that out there while I remember, otherwise the video is just going to be like, oh, what's this? Right, so guys, I'm gonna base coat those for a second time, then I'll check them and I'll decide if I need a third coat. Okay, for the next stage we're going to be moving on to the blue, which is called Cantar Blue. Again, focus. Brand new pot of paint, so we want to give that really good shake. And this is one stage you're really going to need to refer to the magazine. There are certain bits, see where we've done the gold and the green, we've just gone all over it. So we just, doesn't matter whether it's going to be gold or green or whatever, we're just going straight over with a base coat. We're now going to start picking out details. So the shoulder pads are going to be blue, the shields are going to be blue, the flag and any clothing is going to be blue. So we do actually need a smaller brush. So this is the first stage where probably this start brush is ideal. It's nice and small to get into smaller places, but it will cover, possibly with the exception of the flag. But I wouldn't change my brush just to do one flag. And so let's give this a good shake. I've also changed my water pot, just happened to run out, so I gave it a bit of a clean. Now let me show you something about water pots. As you can see, it's filthy inside just after one use. That's the way it's going to go. It's not going to affect your, once this paint is dry, it's not going to affect anything. So it's when you start mixing one colour with another, it's going to cause a problem. But dried paint, you know, if you mixed if you had a little bit of wet red and you were doing white, it's going to turn the whole thing pink. But if you put wet white onto dry red, it's going to be fine. Right, so giving this a really good shake. And I do like the sound of a brand new pot of paint opening. So I don't need to put as much paint on my palette because I'm not doing as much. Although in all fairness, that's probably not going to be enough. But that's fine. So again, we're going to be aiming for 2 coats because we want to cover up the paint that's underneath. Give that a bit of a wash. So let's pick our flag guy, shall we? So let's start with the shoulder pads. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this tip, but this is a little bit more important now. Get a bit of paint on your brush. Just touch your paper with it, just to knock the end off. And what we're going to do is, I'm going to have to take my glasses off for this. We're going to paint the shoulder pad right up to the edging. So we'll still have that gold. Let me just check it goes all the way. So we're still going to have a gold edge. Now you may not get this perfectly neat, that's fine, because what we'll do is we'll touch up. I'm sorry, I've not got my glasses on, so I can't see the monitor. So again, that's only a first coat, but we've left the edges. So the next step I'm going to do is the shield, and I'm going to do, there we go. So keep not too much brush paint on your brush when you get to the edges. And what I personally do is I'll do just the edges first. And you see it's not very good, it's just to cover it. Give a, oh, come on. Yeah, and I'll just gently go up to that edge and just kind of border. It's like when you're colouring things in, you go all the way to the edge and then you colour the middle in last. That's how I paint. How you paint, obviously if you find something that works better for you, that's fine. And then we're not going to do the middle, that's going to stay gold, and that's got a nice little edge to it as well. Now we have got these little lightning strikes. Now if you want to try and go round them and leave the lightning strikes, that's up to you. I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to repaint the lightning strikes at a later stage. There we go, and that's the blue. It's not very neat. It's a first coat. That's fine. I actually want to thin that a little bit more. Ooh, cat's just about to jump up my lap. She jumped up me earlier on. Unfortunately, I was wearing a dressing gown, so she actually ended up jumping on bare leg, and I have all these claw marks up my legs today. There we go. So that's the shield done. So next we're going to do the flag, and the flag's a little bit easier, I think, because what we're going to do is we're going to go around, is like a, I can't think of the word for it, so I'm going to call it a hinge. It's the bit where the flag is attached to the pole, like that. Again, I'm following the magazine so I can see it in more detail. This is probably going to be the hardest bit because it's quite a large area. As you can see, the cat's decided to join us. Oh, you idiot, you've put your foot in the paint. Oh no! Well, it's a good job this paint is water-based, isn't it, missus? Right, sorry, my cat's just put her paw in the green paint. Right, so going over this again, I think this might still be a little bit thick. The coverage is a little bit too good. That's better. That's much better. By having thinner paint, it means I've got to do more coats, but it also means I get nicer coverage and less detail lost. I was just a little bit worried that. Right, so in the magazine they've only gone up to there, and they've left this this bit sticking out, and I'm not totally happy with that. That's better. Right, so then we'll do the other side of the flag. They haven't got any pictures of this on the other side, but pretty much follow the same lines. So you see I'm going round any bits that I need to miss out. And then once I've finished this, I'll apply a second coat I won't show you the painting of the second coat. I've been showing you first and second coats. So I'm just going to switch to first coats now, and then there we go. Now I'm not 100% sure where to stop on that one, so if in doubt, go a little bit too much. You can always bring it back later with the gold. Right, so the next bit is the another shoulder pad, because he's got one on each side. So again, just going to try and leave the edges, and again, if you're not 100% sure, go a little bit more and then bring it back with the gold. You can, in fact, I think this gold will paint easier over the blue. Right, so next bit is any clothing. Now this one hasn't got any clothing, so let's find one with, there we go, he'll do. So this one's going to be quite tricky to do because he's quite detailed, and that's his sword. So we need to find where the detail is. Now there might be some trim on the end there because there's a little bit of borderline, border bit. Now that part there looks like his armour, so I'm going to leave that. Again, what I tend to find with these is you paint them, you think this bit is a sword or a water bottle or whatever you might think it is, and then you paint it. Now as you paint, more detail pops out, and then you go, oh no, that wasn't whatever that was after all. So you may find yourself going over, you might have painted something blue and then you realised it's something else, so you go over that with say black. I don't think this is compulsory, but make sure you get in the inside of the cloaks. If you can see it, it definitely needs to be painted. We had a big debate a while back. I thought this was rather interesting. Someone had posted on one of the forums, do you paint the inside of the shields? And the whole debate was about whether you see it or not. Now I personally paint inside the shields because then I know it's been painted, but a lot of people were having really good opinion points saying, well, it's not visible, so you don't need to paint it, and that's a completely valid argument. I think I want to take this off the base really to finish this cloak. That would certainly be easier. It's one of the advantages of not gluing it on, is that you can always take it apart again. Right, so that cloak is done, and then he's got another bit coming down here. And can you see we're being a bit neater now because we're picking out certain pieces of him. Now what you'll find, I might accidentally get a bit on his elbow, for example. That's fine, we can always tidy up later on. General rule of thumb, lower detail should be painted first. So see, this cloak is underneath his armour, so if you paint that first, because you might accidentally get bits on his armour, but yet when you paint his armour you're less likely to get bits of gold on the lower pieces. That I think is all of his cloak done. So as I'm here, I'm just going to finish off his other bits. Shoulder pad. And his other shoulder pad. Be careful not to touch the paint that's wet. Another thing to note, guys, if you have painted, say for example his shoulder pad, and then you think, oh, I've missed a bit, 5 minutes later leave it, because what happens is the way that paint dries, it forms a skin on the outside. If you start pulling that skin about, it's going to ruin the paintwork. So let it fully dry. Right, now there's something about there we go. So I need to just get into there, so you can see that that's such a small area inside there. I'm going to paint too much, so that's why we get that bit first. I think that's all of him. Shoulder pads, flags, shield. He's got no shield. Right, so I'm going to get on and do the rest of them just on the first coat. No, I'm going to do the second coat as well. You can see what the first coat looks like, and then I'll come back once the second coat is done. There you go. I'll leave you with that image, and then when I come back and I've done the second coat, you'll see the difference. Okay, so I have done a second coat on blue. It's still a bit wet, but as you can see, it's nice. It's a nice solid colour, and I'm happy with that. Now, a little bit of a spoiler, they haven't mentioned this yet in the magazine. There will be other things. We'll be adding a shade to that, which is going to make that detail pop, and then we're going to be doing some layering. It hasn't got to that stage in the magazine yet, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. This is this one. I'm quite pleased with him. The next three were very easy. It was just shoulder pads and shield. This one, they didn't specifically mention him in the magazine. Well, they have actually. You've got a little bit on the spare, which I've decided to go blue. Actually, now I spotted him in the magazine. He hasn't. I think they call that a top knot. I've done it blue because why not? It's my model, and if anybody wants to know why that's blue and it shouldn't be blue, well, I can make a story up about him. Maybe he was part of a great battle and he fought heroically, and as an award he got that top knot, so that people can see him and it inspires them as well. You know, he did a great thing. Whatever, just make it up. So yeah, but again, this is one of the beauties of this particular model. If all the other part works that I've done, if you do them correctly, theoretically everyone's models are going to look the same. With this, if you do it correctly, yours are going to look different from somebody else's, and I've noticed that with Games Workshop. You can paint this to your best of your ability. Someone else can paint that exactly the same colour, and yet when you put your model on the table, you can see a difference. You can look at a model and go, oh yeah, that's been done by John, that one's been done by Debbie, and that one's been done by Steve. You know, you end up having your own style. I am trying to do this quite basically, because I'm trying to go through the magazine. But right, so next we're going to move on to the lead belcher, which is the last colour. And there's two. This is the first colour that we're going to be using for all of the models. So it's ever so simple. Anything that's metal, such as the tops of these poles, and the weapons, the spear ends, any pieces of armour, they're all going to get done silver. So what I'm going to do, you've seen all of this before, it's just I'm painting a different colour in a different area. So I'm actually going to do these 2 coats, and I'm going to do it all speeded up. Now, one thing to look out for, guys, I'm going to develop a production line. What I mean by that is, as I paint my models, I'm going to line them up. So paint, 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 and you'll end up seeing that I've formed lines. and then as I do the second coat, I'll go to this one because this is the first one I painted, so therefore it's the first one that's dried, and then I'll just form another production line. So I'll see you in a second, guys. Right, that's all the lead belcher done, or silver as I'd prefer to call it. There is one piece I'm going to miss out, which is the base details. What they want us to do is to take this figure, detach it from the base, and just paint the Stormcast figure that's on the base. I'm going to do that off camera. You'll see there's a little dead Stormcast there, if I can ever get the focus. Now that is exactly the same as these, a little bit of Retributor armour and some blue, so I'm not going to worry about that with the length of this video. So this is what we've got. Let's find some of the better ones. So you can see they're now starting to pop, as we call it. Now don't be worried that some of the colours are dull. This is what we call a base coat. What they haven't mentioned in the magazine is that we're going to be doing some shade, which is going to make some details pop. So for example, when we put some shade in there, it's going to make those individual scales pop out a bit more. Then we're going to highlight them. They're really going to stick out. These are going to look fantastic. And then these are the Oryx, and I'll just show you the hero figure. He tends to have a bit more armour on him. What I tended to find was when I put I put my first coat of lead belcher on, the second coat I really did thin down a little bit more than normal, for the pure reason that you didn't really need two solid coats, because you've already got the solid coat of green and the silver is a stronger colour. This is something I've not mentioned. It's a completely different subject in itself. If you put a strong colour over a weaker colour, it eliminates the need for one extra coat. So at the most simplest level, if you were to put a white down as a base coat, and then you just the one coat, and then you applied a red base coat on top, you probably won't need definitely won't need a third layer, because the first layer really is just sticking to the plastic. All of that ugly first coat is really down to the fact that you could see the plastic underneath. But I still went over the second layer with a very thin, and what I found was that there might be little spots that I might have missed. It just enabled me to pick them up. So that was a lot of work. Let me switch to my front camera. Oh, my camera's moved. Sorry guys, because cats play in this room when I'm not there. Right, that was an awful lot of work, and that's the way it's going to go. Well, it's not the way it's going to go. Normally what you'll do, the problem with this hobby is you buy your subject matter, you then buy your paints, you then buy more subject matter, and then you already own some of the paints, so you don't need to buy so many paints. So we probably won't have another magazine where we get 4 paints. So obviously the way the magazine is done, they can't give you everything at the beginning and then leave you with nothing, just figures, because then no one would buy the future magazines. Oh, would you mind? Sorry, this is determined to get into view. So there she is. This is Spirit. Look, are you happy now? You're on camera. Look. Yeah, so each time we get new Stormcasts from now on, we already have the gold, and we have the lead belcher, and we have the Cantor blue. They will introduce more paints as we go along. As we get Oryx, we will already have the green, and we will already have the lead belcher. So because we've done build, now there's lots of painting to do. I've had a very quick look at the future magazines, and you'll get a few figures and then you paint them. So we will be building and painting probably from now on. There will be new skills, so I'm going to change the beginning of the video format, which is hello, we're going to be doing this issue, and then I'm going to tell you what skills we're going to be learning for the first time. So yes, that's it for this video. Happy with the result. At the very least, if you stopped now, obviously at the beginning, if you play this game, if you're reading through the rules and learning to play it, we had Grey Army versus Grey Army. Now at the very least, we have obvious differences between the two. Sorry, it's not picking the colours up on this front camera, but you can see now it's obvious which ones are on which side, because some are gold and some are green. So yeah, very, very happy. So we've been through the next week, but we are getting one figure next week, which is a Praetor Prime miniature. You usually tend to find... Are you happy there? Are you happy there? No, Shadow wants to join us, so I'm going to have to put you down on the floor. Not put you down, but... yeah, so you tend to find when you get one figure, it's a hero model, and then when you get a batch of them, they're much weaker rank and file troops. Right, so guys, I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to try and clean this up, ready for the next magazine. So, thank you very much for watching, guys.